trade and investment under the G20 framework. G20 economies account for 85% of global GDP, 75% of global trade and 60% of the world's population. But the multilateral trading system faces uncertainty due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Russia-Ukraine conflict, unilateralism, protectionism and fragmentation. So on India at G20, we asked today, can India as G20 president help in bringing greater predictability, stability and trust to the multilateral trading system and make it more responsive to the needs and priorities of developing nations? I'm Munmal Bhattacharya. Let's get started with the top stories. Union Minister of Communications, Electronics and Information Technology Ashwini Vaishnav launches G20 Global Digital Innovation Alliance program and Stay Safe online campaign. Alliance aims to recognize and support innovators that have digital solutions for various world economies. Union IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav terms G20 Global Digital Innovation Alliance program and Stay Safe online campaign as path-breaking in the realms of cybersecurity and the potential of startups. India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant pens an article on India's competitiveness challenge. Writes, India has advanced significantly on many fronts and has the potential to leapfrog to a higher stage of development. Asserts it is critical to enhance the nation's competitiveness for long-term private sector efficiency. And Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath chairs a high-level review meeting in Lucknow to take stock of the state's preparedness for G20-related events in the state. Tensions within the multilateral trading system have long been apparent, and even today, the global trade landscape continues to be uncertain. What are those uncertainties? What did the G20 Bali Declaration say on trade and investment? And can India as G20 president nudge the advanced and emerging economies that make up the G20 grouping towards a new era of multilateral trading system? This report brings you up to speed with the present global trade landscape and the task cut out for India's G20 chair to further the cause of mutually beneficial and rules-based international trade. Take a look.
The COVID-19 pandemic, Russia-Ukraine war and trade and technology wars have disrupted global chains impacting international trade. There are instances of unilateralism such as European Union's revised trade rules in force since February 2021 that allow the bloc to introduce sanctions without prior authorization from the WTO in the event. It faces obstruction in dispute settlement from an opposing country. Other examples are the economic response to Russia's action in Ukraine that includes sanctions as well as the decision to revoke Russia's most favored nation status. The two largest economies, the United States and China, are waging a trade and technology war, replete with sanctions against companies' export restrictions and tariffs. Vaccine nationalism has also been apparent, and food protectionism across the world is on a rise in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine war. COVID-19 led to the steepest decline in international trade on record, but also the fastest recovery. The World Bank notes trade rebounded faster and stronger than any other component of global output. The year 2021 saw a record $28.5 trillion worth of trade, occurring a 13% increase from pre-pandemic levels in 2019. Trade has the potential to boost growth of the developing world. Southeast Asia, South Asia, Central Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa are forecast to lead trade volume growth in the next 5 years, with India, the Philippines and Vietnam potentially leading the trade growth in the near future. Another case in point is that South-South trade continues to increase and is currently 42% higher than pre-pandemic levels. Notably, participation of the Global South in regional and global value chains is still occurring. while the contributions of past drivers of GVC participation, such as China, have plateaued. Those of other developing countries are increasing, such as Bangladesh in textiles and Vietnam in electronics. The average year-on-year growth of GVC participation of G20 developing countries, excluding China, stands at 9.88% between 1990 to 2018, based on OECD source data. G20 represents a shift eastward and southward in the global economy, and its robust response to the 2008 global financial crisis has lent it legitimacy as the economic steering committee of the world. However, the global trading regime needs to be responsive to the needs and developing nations, as asserted by Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the G20 summit in China in 2016. The G20 Bali Declaration of November 2022 put the spotlight on a number of other issues that are relevant to the multilateral trading regime. It reaffirmed that the rules-based, non-discriminatory, free, fair, open, inclusive, equitable, sustainable and transparent multilateral trading system with the WTO at its core is indispensable to advancing our shared objectives of inclusive growth, innovation, job creation and sustainable development in an open and interconnected world, as well as to supporting the resilience and recovery of a global economy under strain due to COVID-19 and global supply chain disruption. Asserting that reforming the WTO is key for strengthening trust in the multilateral trading system, it vowed to continue to ensure a level playing field and fair competition to foster a favorable trade and investment environment for all. It noted the importance of the contribution of the multilateral trading system to promote the UN 2030 Agenda and its SDGs. Commending the successful conclusion of the 12th WTO Ministerial Conference, it committed to advance the positive momentum by engaging in active, constructive, pragmatic and focused discussions on WTO reform to improve all its functions, including reform of the dispute settlement mechanism. It also committed to reinforce international trade and investment cooperation to address supply chain issues and avoid trade disruptions. It called for mutually supportive trade and climate or environmental policies that are also WTO consistent and contribute to the objectives of sustainable development. It recognized the importance of inclusive international cooperation on digital trade and the need to promote value addition through sustainable and inclusive investment in highly productive sectors such as downstream manufacturing, digital trade and services, and to foster linkages between foreign investors and local enterprises, particularly MSMEs. And lastly, it noted the initiative of the Indonesian presidency to hold discussions on policy coherence between trade, investment and industry, and to continue addressing industry-related issues in the broader G20 process. Coupled with specialized government level and civil society engagement under G20 Sherpa and finance tracks, as well as knowledge and resource backing by multilateral organizations such as WTO, UNCTAD, OECD, World Bank and IMF. As G20 President, India has the opportunity to further the cause of mutually beneficial, rules-based international trade amid the current geopolitical and economic uncertainties. Bureau Report, DD India.
And for perspective on trade and investment under the framework of the G20, we are joined by Professor Abhijit Das, international trade expert and former head Center for WTO Studies with the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade or IIFT, and Rupa Datta. She is principal economic advisor with the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade or DPIIT, and she is presently dealing with G20 in DPIIT. Such a pleasure to have the two distinguished guests on India at G20 this evening. Professor Das, I'll come to you first. WTO, we know, is the premier international organization that deals with rules of global trade. In 2016, China set up the G20 Working Group on Trade and Investment, and since successive presidents have continued with that arrangement. Do you see G20 and WTO playing a complementary role when it comes to boosting trade and investment and ensuring the multilateral trading system is fair, open and sustainable, or do you see them as overlapping mandates?
Thank you, Munmun, for having me on your program. You've raised a very, very important question. It goes to the heart of the respective mandates of two very crucial organizations, the World Trade Organization on the one hand and the G20 on the other. At times there have been overlaps in what the G20 has been doing in the arena of trade. But broadly speaking, G20 has tried to provide a broad level guidance on trade issues. India particularly, along with South Africa and a few other developing countries at the G20 platform, has repeatedly reiterated that decision making at the G20 cannot supplant decision making at the WTO. So we need to be cognizant of that very important, unique interface between G20 and the WTO. But having said that, on certain issues, the G20 has been providing a broad political guidance, and that broad political guidance, in a way, has been getting reflected in the approach of countries at the WTO. To give you a very concrete illustration, the outcome of Trade and Investment Working Group at Sorrento in 2022, those outcomes have a considerable similarity, considerable parallel with the outcome of the WTO Ministerial Conference concluded in June earlier this year. So certainly G20 at times has provided the inspiration, has tried to goad the WTO membership to take decisions in a particular direction. And that is a very delicate balancing which India will need to do under its presidency of the G20.
So you are saying that there is a unique interface between G20 and WTO, and India needs to do that delicate balancing act. Ms. Datta, I'll come to you now as the government official who's dealing with G20 in DPIIT. What are the priorities of the government of India as far as business and investment is concerned?
Firstly, I'd like to thank you for giving me this opportunity for giving government's perspective for the entire G20 scenario. So far as government is concerned, and so far as we in DPIIT are concerned, obviously business promotion, investment facilitation and promoting manufacturing remains our key ask in this area. So what we are looking at in G20, where we also have focus on business issues, where we have a engagement group called V20, and we also have a new engagement group called Startup 20. This is India's initiative for this year. The startup system is a very, very vibrant and throbbing system, and we hope that this initiative continues throughout for all other presidencies. And this is one angle which has been very widely accepted by most of the countries, G20 countries. Coming back to the business issue, I would like to mention that we are looking at a number of task forces in our own in DPIIT, as well as there are a lot of overlaps with our sister department. It's the Department of Commerce, which looks after Trade and Investment Working Group. Some of the key areas we are looking at are inclusive global value chains for resilient global trade and investment, focus on skilling, future of work, skilling and mobility, digital transformation, energy, climate change and resource efficiency, technology, innovation and R&D, financing for global economic recovery, and financial inclusion for economic empowerment. So innovation, just one more line. So innovation, sustainability and knowledge are some of the key pillars, and we are, besides all these 7 overarching topics, we are looking at how to ensure especially the MSMEs become part of global value chain, and especially how to ensure access to digital trade and digital infrastructure across countries and across all income groups.
Right. So you've outlined the priorities of India as far as business and industry is concerned. Professor Das, your thoughts on India's priorities, could they not have been more relevant considering the current global geopolitical and economic conditions?
The priorities which Rupa has highlighted are certainly very important, but these will not remain the only priorities. I am very sure that under India's presidency, other priorities on trade matters are likely to include issues around WTO reform. Then certainly there would be discussions on resilient supply chains. I would not be surprised if some discussions also happen relating to issues around, let's say, trade finance, trade logistics. So these would definitely be some of the other priorities. But what will be most important is whether India can steer the discussion, steer the outcome of G20 under this presidency to make trade an engine of growth, poverty reduction and development, particularly in developing countries. I think that will be very important benchmark to measure the success of India's presidency. And I'm pretty sure that the government has done the necessary legwork, has undertaken consultations with stakeholders, has roped in the right organizations to prepare the background papers, to prepare issue notes, and in a way it has the entire game plan in place.
So the priorities are quite relevant given the current geopolitical and economic conditions. Ms. Das, we saw in the Bali Declaration a decision was taken to institutionalize industry-related issues, and it also calls for more coherence between trade, industry as well as investment in order to achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Is that going to be a continuing theme? Because we are at the midpoint of the SDG cycle.
Are you asking me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Firstly, I fully agree with Abhijit, and it's a pleasure to see him here, an old friend and colleague of mine. Yes, trade. Some of the issues which are highlighted were more focused on business, but like I said, trade and investment related issues would include trade as a engine of growth and sustainable and inclusive industrialization, resilience of global value chains, and how to use trade as an engine for promoting growth. Now, the point which, if you can just, can you just repeat your last question for 1 minute?
I was asking you about how relevant under India's presidency of the G20 would be the assertion that we saw in the Bali Declaration of ensuring greater policy coherence between trade, investment and industry, considering a decision has been taken there in Indonesia to institutionalize all discussion on industry-related matters.
Yes, in fact, I was there when the trade and investment working group meetings were happening, and it was a consensus-based decision where it was decided that there would be, as you said, coherence between trade and investment and industrial policies. And it was also mentioned that this would focus on adoption of Industry 4.0 technologies in production processes, look at industrial decarbonization in driving green and digital transformation, and advancing cooperation on industry-related issues. So this also, there were a lot of talk and there were documents prepared for best practices in all these areas, and especially in relation to meeting the commitments under the Sustainable Development Goals pertaining to trade and industry, and also, like I said, sustainable investment, focus on innovation, and I would again repeat, digital access to all, especially MSMEs, to all enterprises, to all societies across the world, across countries and across and within a country also. So, because the issue, this became very important, I think, during the COVID-19 pandemic, and when need for having domestic as well as global value chains and digital access. We all saw how digital access helped us in leading our day-to-day life. So this access has to be widespread, it has to be democratized, and it has to be all countries and sections have to adopt it, adapt to it, and use it for improving their lot. I'll just say one more sentence. As Abhijit has also said and you have mentioned, we are also looking at specific outcomes. The issue notes are ready, these have been circulated, there have been a lot of discussions with national and international organizations. Now what we expect is through the series of meetings which we are going to start from the month of January, quite a few have already been held at Sherpa and other levels. We are looking at getting some solid outcomes in these areas. How does India lead these discussions, and how do we look at some specific outcomes which we can achieve and which we can, say it would be the crowning feather of our presidency.
Right. Professor Das, is this also an opportunity for India to forge greater consensus between the developed economies and the developing economies to make the multilateral trading system more responsive to the needs and concerns and priorities of the global south?
You're very right, Munmun. This is certainly an opportunity to forge consensus on some of the burning issues at this juncture at the WTO, the most important of which is the need, the desirability, the imperative to revive the now dysfunctional appellate body. Now that is an issue which cuts across north-south divide, and it will be really the developing countries who will be the main beneficiaries if the rule-based multilateral trading system is in a way strengthened, beefed up by revival of the appellate body. At this juncture, when appellate body no longer exists, it's an open question whether we are seeing a rule-based system in existence. Perhaps not. We have no mechanism to ensure that countries comply with their obligations so that others can enjoy their rights. So one of the biggest contribution of India's presidency in the arena of trade, which will help both developed and developing countries, and in particular developing countries, will be if India can forge a consensus on how to revive the appellate body. I think that will be a singular, most important achievement of India's presidency in the arena of trade. And let's be hopeful of that. I'm sure our diplomats, officials, trade negotiators are nimble-footed enough to bridge the divergence that might exist in this area, to see what is feasible, what can be attempted, so that on the area, in this area of appellate body, we have a concrete outcome by September next year.
Right, so this is an opportunity for India to forge consensus on that issue as well. Ms. Datta, we are aware of the kind of role that MSMEs play in developing or emerging economies, including in India. They have so much of potential when it comes to job creation and supporting livelihoods. Now, a theme in Indonesian presidency was making these MSMEs more globally competitive. Will that be a continuing theme as far as India is concerned?
Absolutely so. There have been several, discussions held on this issue, and what probably we are looking at is digital transformation of MSMEs, which have also been discussed in previous trade and investment working groups, increasing their participation in global value chain, facilitating access to information and markets, increasing their overall competitiveness. And here, issues of enhancing financial access and digital financial inclusion becomes important. So we are probably looking at creating platforms for MSMEs where, and Indonesia, of course, was very clear, was very focused on this discussion, and we in India would like to take it forward. We are probably looking at some of the issues. I mean, this is still in the thought stage where India would like to steer discussions. Establishing a global online trade help desk, look at how, and as I said, integrate MSMEs with global trade, develop guiding principles on digital platforms, and leveraging the entire use of digital technology so that MSMEs can become part of global value chains. They can They can move up, they can exhibit their products, and they can also be part of this entire process of improving trade, increasing prosperity, and ensuring well-being for all, which I would say would be the basic tagline for all the sustainable development goals also.
Right. Professor Das, quickly I'll ask you that there are several challenges currently facing the multilateral trading system. What is the one challenge that you would like India to help address through the G20 to the extent it can as part of G20 framework?
Murman, I have already identified that challenge, which is reviving the appellate body. I think there is
so
no
that
challenge.
is the biggest challenge. Right. And do you agree, Ms. Datta? Will that be one of the imponderables?
Yes, definitely from the WTO perspective, which is consensus based and which is rules based and which is very important in today's today's present situation, where we need to have a body like WTO, and this was a very, as Abhijit has said, it was a very welcome decision when the WTO declaration was adopted, and G20 continues in that framework. But taking it more than, like, I again would like to end with our manufacturing and investment perspective. We would really like, and we'll also use G20 as a how to promote investments across the world, especially also with focusing in India. Right. So catalyzing investment, promoting industrial development, focusing on startups, and maybe trying to set up some global institutes based on innovation and sustainability would be some of our key asks from the G20.
Right. We'll leave it at that. Thank you, Ms. Datta and Professor Das, for joining us with your views on India at G20 today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant has penned an article on India's competitiveness challenge. Kant writes that India has advanced significantly on many fronts and houses the potential to leap to a higher stage of development. Kant further asserted that it is critical to enhance the nation's competitiveness for long-term private sector efficiency. Minister of Communications, Electronics and IT Ashwini Vaishnav launched the G20 Global Digital Innovation Alliance program and a Stay Safe online campaign today. The G20 Digital Innovation Alliance aims to recognize and support innovators that have digital solutions for various world economies. It aims to identify, recognize and enable the adoption of innovative and impactful digital technologies developed by startups which can address the needs of humanity in critically important sectors. The Ministry of Electronics and IT is running a campaign titled Stay Safe Online, aimed at creating awareness among citizens, including specially abled persons, to stay safe in an online world in the wake of widespread use of social media platforms and rapid adoption of digital payments. In Lucknow, Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath chaired a high-level meeting where he took stock of the state's preparedness for the forthcoming G20-related events in the state. Uttar Pradesh's capital, Lucknow, is all set to get a makeover on account of the upcoming UP Global Investors Summit and the G20 meetings. And with that, we come to the close of this edition of India at G20. Thanks for watching.
FICCI's outlook for the year 2022-23 is the Indian economy on top of the things amidst current global economic recession.
As far as FY23 itself is concerned, we're looking at growth at about 7%. First thing that I'm focusing on very strongly is MSMEs. Startups who are our members, how do we expose them in a specific manner?